Hi guys, welcome back to my channel Lush Gardener. In today's video we are going to be talking about top dressing. Is it good or bad? Because a lot of people do use top dressing. Now guys, I would say about top dressing, this is something, it all depends upon your environment and climate and the type of soil mix that you tend to use. A lot of people, especially from Vietnam or Korea, they tend to use top dressing. The reason is because they have a very different environment. Apart from that, the soil mix that they tend to use is more like a soilless kind of a media that they tend to use. They also use ceramic pots, plus they use top dressing, and nothing happens to the succulent is because they have a very different type of soil mix. Apart from that, they have a soilless media and stuff like that, but it does not work really well for a lot of us, especially people who are growing their succulents indoor or people who are from tropical environment like myself. I have never used top dressing. A lot of time people do get confused and they think that the soil that I have used, this is a top dressing. This is not the top dressing, but this is the actual soil media for the entire succulent. It's not a top dressing, and I'll show you the reason what happens when you tend to use top dressing, especially those polished white stones. They come in white color, green, neon, or different types of colors, and a lot of people tend to use that. And this is the image, as you can see over here. The succulent, I think it's most probably a Saduaria letizia, and the person has used a good amount of pebbles on the top layer of soil. I don't even have to tell you, just by looking at the picture itself, you can see that the succulent is stretching. You can see there's a lot of yellowing of leaves, and now this is ideally Saduaria letizia does get yellow leaves, which is their pigment, the carotenoid, which gives that yellow pigment. But over here, this is not the pigment. It is in a very unhealthy condition. The reason is because the succulent is absorbing in too much of moisture. Now, if you're going to take a closer look, you can see the upper layer of soil is completely covered with these polished stones. Now, what is happening over here is that when you tend to block the upper layer of soil, like when you tend to block this upper layer of soil, there is no way for the soil to dry. So always remember, the upper layer of soil should be open. There should not be any kind of restriction, because this is your only hope. This is where the evaporation happens. This is where the soil starts to dry. So never ever, block this area. This is where the soil will start to dry. Initially, the soil will start to dry. The upper layer of soil will dry. Then the lower, as soon as the upper layer of soil tends to dry, the moisture that is beneath tends to get sucked up to the upper layer, which again starts to dry, and that is how your soil tends to dry. So if you're going to block the main area where the soil tends to dry, it is going to block moisture inside, and that's exactly what's happening on the picture on your left hand side. The soil might have been moist for a very long time. The succulent has sucked up a lot of water, and I don't think it is going to survive for too long if the changes are not made. So that's all about it. Please do not keep this spot blocked. It has to be open. There has to be a good amount of air circulation. Especially if you're a beginner, you will be finding it extremely difficult to understand when the soil is dry and when the soil is not dry. But trust me, the soil is going to take very, very long if you're going to cover it up with pebbles. Now, I did ask question to some people why they do so, but I never understood the logic behind that. I'll tell you what they said. They said that they are adding pebbles on the upper layer of soil. The reason behind that is so that the lower leaves do not come in contact with the water, or the soil does not fall onto the leaves. Now, that's completely incorrect, guys. You might happen to save any water splashing onto the leaves, or probably some mud splashing onto the leaves. You might be able to overcome one problem, but there is a main problem, and that is your soil is not going to dry. It is going to trap moisture. So in order to save your lower leaves from getting wet, you might end up killing your succulent by having too much of moisture in the soil. And I never understood the logic, so I'm just going to show you over here. I do have another succulent over here, and I'm going to water it, and I'm going to show it to you. So if you're going to water like the way I tend to water, as you can see, if you're going to water like this, there is no way that the water is going to touch the lower leaves. The succulent has to be slightly elevated above the soil. And if you're going to water it, trust me guys, the soil will also not splash onto, there won't be a mud splatter on the leaves, Apart from that, there won't be any water that is going to touch the leaves because my soil is loose, porous and well draining. The moment I tend to add water, the water immediately starts to pass through the drain hole. So there is no way that the water is going to pool in and it's going to touch the leaves and that is going to damage the leaves. That is least of your concerns, because if you're going to have a loose, porous, well draining soil mix, if the succulent is kind of elevated above the soil, and if you're going to water the way I tend to water, trust me, the low leaves will not even come in contact with water, nor will the soil spill onto the leaves. So it is pretty simple. You do not need to add pebbles on the upper layer of soil. Trust me, over the period of time, the succulent will start to struggle because those pebbles are polished, they are non-porous, they will block they will trap the moisture inside the soil, which will lead your soil to stay moister for a longer period of time. And always remember, if the soil stays moist for a longer period of time, you know what's exactly going to happen. A lot of people tend to use, there is something called as cardamom. I'm not very sure if I'm pronouncing that correct. I'll put up the image and the name on the screen. A lot of people tend to use this. Yes, this might work, but again, it all depends upon your environment and climate. Some people use this as a top dressing, especially for bonsais, for succulents, but it all depends upon your environment and climate. To be on the safer side, I would say don't do a top dressing, just let it be natural. Also, a lot of people do add pebbles on the upper layer of soil. They feel that that looks very pretty. Now guys, there's no point of adding something like that to make it look pretty if the succulent is going to die in some days or some months. So avoid doing that. I know it looks very attractive. Probably you can use those pebbles for some other plants, but don't use it for succulents. I don't know if it's going to work for other plants also. I would never use something that can block the main surface. I don't want to do that because the upper surface is the most important thing. That is what helps the soil dry faster. When the upper layer of soil is dry, it pulls out the moisture from mid-level. Once that mid-level moisture comes up to the surface, again when that is dried, then the lower level comes to the mid-level to upper level, and that's how the soil tends to dry. So I wouldn't want to kind of block anything on the upper surface which can reduce or trap moisture. I basically do not want to obstruct by putting up anything on the upper layer of soil, because that is how my soil tends to dry. So I would just leave it as it is so that it can work out really well. So guys, that's all about it. I hope that this video was helpful to you. If it was, please hit the like button. And if you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing to it. Until then, take care, stay safe and keep planting.